Welcome to Life Stories, where a single sentence can shatter a life or save one. What if the person you publicly humiliated turned out to be the one holding your future in her hands? This is not just a story about prejudice. It's about power, silence, and the cost of judging someone before knowing who they truly are. It starts in an airport, like any other day. But by the end, careers will collapse, truths will be exposed, and one woman will be forced to confront the darkest part of herself under the gaze of the very person she tried to erase. If you've ever wondered whether people truly change, or if they only change when they're caught, this story will stay with you long after the screen fades. Let's step into the moment where everything unraveled. The terminal at LAX buzzed with the usual chaos of a Monday evening. Boarding calls echoed from the loudspeakers, their robotic clarity cutting through the murmurs and footsteps of hundreds. Business travelers in pressed suits juggled phones and briefcases. Families wrestled with strollers and carry-ons. In the midst of it all, an elderly black woman walked slowly, deliberately, her cane tapping softly against the polished floor. Her name was Eleanor Grant. She wore a tailored navy coat with silver buttons and a silk scarf knotted neatly at her throat. Her salt and pepper hair framed a face that had seen decades of progress, setbacks, and quiet victories. But that day, her composure was met with contempt. Just steps away from the first-class boarding gate, a flight attendant in her early 30s blocked Eleanor's path. Courtney Blake. Blonde, poised, and sharp-featured, with the icy precision of someone who had learned to smile without meaning it. Courtney's eyes flicked to Eleanor's cane, then her modest handbag, then her face. A brief pause. "Ma'am, this area is for first-class passengers only," she said flatly, with just enough condescension to curdle the air between them. Eleanor didn't respond at first. She simply met Courtney's gaze, calm but unyielding, and handed over her boarding pass encased in soft brown leather. Seat 1A. Courtney barely glanced at it. Her jaw tightened. "You must be mistaken," she muttered, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "These tickets cost thousands of dollars. We've had issues before." She reached out, faster than expected, and snatched the pass from Eleanor's fingers. The leather slipped, the cane wobbled, and with a sudden crack, it fell to the floor. The sound was sharp, hollow, cutting clean through the crowded gate like a whip crack in a church. Gasps. The kind that ripple when something unspeakable happens in public. Eleanor said nothing. She reached down slowly, her movements as elegant as they were deliberate, and retrieved the cane. Then she looked up at Courtney with a gaze so piercing, so calm, it made the younger woman blink. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your life," Eleanor said softly. Her voice was even, but something in it made the surrounding passengers fall silent. Courtney's expression faltered. Her cheeks flushed, not with shame, but with defiance. "Are you threatening me?" she snapped. "If you don't belong in this section, I have every right to remove you." But before she could finish, a hush swept the crowd. A tall man in a tailored black suit approached. Marcus Whitman, senior manager of the airline, rarely left the executive wing, but here he was, eyes fixed on the scene. Without a word, he bowed his head to Eleanor Grant. That's when the atmosphere shifted. Whispers surged through the terminal. Marcus's voice rang out, low and solemn. "Mrs. Grant, I deeply apologize for this unacceptable treatment. We will handle it immediately." He turned to Courtney, and something in his expression made the younger woman step back. "Do you understand what you've done?" he asked her. Courtney's mouth opened, but no sound came. Her chest rose and fell with panic. She glanced down at the boarding pass in her hand, only now registering the name printed in bold, Eleanor Grant. It meant nothing to her. But the way Marcus spoke it, like royalty, like a warning. "What are you talking about?" she whispered. "Eleanor Grant is not only a first-class passenger," Marcus said, his voice cold. "She's the founder and chairwoman of this airline, the woman who built everything you think you're protecting." Courtney's knees nearly gave out. Gasps turned into murmurs. Phones were lifted. Videos began recording. But Eleanor said nothing. She stood tall, holding the very cane that had been knocked from her hand, her face unreadable. She hadn't flinched, hadn't raised her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than anything Courtney had screamed. The younger woman staggered back, stunned, her face drained of color. In that moment, surrounded by passengers, colleagues, and judgmental eyes, she was no longer in control, no longer a gatekeeper. She was simply a woman exposed by her own assumptions, her authority undone not by anger, but by grace. Would you have apologized if I were just another old black woman without a title? The question wasn't spoken aloud, but it thundered through the space between them. What would you have done if you were Eleanor Grant? Could you have answered hatred with dignity? Because the real story was only just beginning, and the price of redemption was far greater than Courtney Blake could ever imagine. Courtney sat in the crew room, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were pale. The murmurs outside the door felt miles away, yet every syllable struck her like shrapnel. Her uniform, pressed to perfection just hours earlier, now felt like a costume clinging to a fraud. She stared blankly ahead, but her mind burned with one name, Eleanor Grant. The woman she judged, belittled, dismissed in front of 100 witnesses. And who had, without raising her voice or pointing a single accusatory finger, shattered the illusion Courtney had spent her life clinging to. What stung more than the humiliation was the realization that Eleanor hadn't gloated. No triumph, no retaliation, just poise. As if she had endured this scene, or versions of it, far too many times to be surprised anymore. The door opened. A voice rang out, crisp and controlled. "Miss Blake, come with us." Courtney stood, legs trembling, and followed the two uniformed supervisors down the corridor. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, every step echoing a truth she didn't want to admit. She wasn't the victim here, no matter how much her pride screamed otherwise. Inside the executive boardroom, the air was colder. Marcus Whitman sat at the head of the table. Next to him, a man Courtney had only seen in training videos, Noah Fields, VP of Personnel, known for his unforgiving stance on ethics violations. And then, at the far end, her, Eleanor Grant. Seated calmly, her cane resting gently against the side of the chair, the soft gleam of her scarf catching the light. Her expression was unreadable. Courtney couldn't look at her. Noah cleared his throat. "Miss Blake, we've reviewed the footage, heard the testimonies, and there's no ambiguity about what occurred at Gate 14. His words were like glass, polished but sharp. You not only violated passenger dignity policies, but you did so to the founder of this company. That fact only highlights the deeper issue. You made assumptions based on race, age, and appearance." "I didn't know who she was," Courtney said too quickly. "Exactly," Marcus interrupted, his voice harsher than before. "And if she hadn't been who she was, if she had just been someone with no power, no title, would you have still demanded an apology?" Courtney's throat tightened. She couldn't answer. Noah leaned forward. "Before we proceed with disciplinary action, Mrs. Grant has requested to speak." The room fell into a stunned silence. Eleanor stood, not with stiffness, but with command. Her eyes swept across the table, then settled on Courtney. "I've been in this industry long enough to know the system," she said quietly. "I've seen how uniforms can give people a false sense of superiority, how protocol becomes a mask for bias." She paused. "But I've also seen people change." Courtney's eyes darted up, startled. "I'm not interested in vengeance," Eleanor continued. "I'm interested in accountability. Miss Blake didn't just disrespect me. She disrespected every person who's ever had to prove they belong in a place that was already theirs." A breathless pause. Then she added, "I don't want her fired. I want her to face herself." Noah sat back, blinking. Eleanor turned to Courtney directly. "I want you to work for me. Not in first class. Not in the air, on the ground. For the next 6 months, you'll report to the company's Diversity and Bias Education Division. You'll attend every workshop, listen to every story, serve in community outreach flights in underserved areas. And when it's over, if I believe you've truly changed, not for me, but for yourself, you'll get your wings back." Courtney stared at her, stunned. "Why? Why would you give me that chance?" Eleanor's eyes were soft but unwavering. "Because someone once gave me one. And because real change doesn't come from punishment. It comes from being forced to look in the mirror when you least want to." The silence in the room was thunderous. Courtney couldn't speak. She could only nod, her throat choked with something more unbearable than guilt, humility. Outside, the world went on. Passengers lined up, Planes roared into the sky, but inside that room, a reckoning had begun. Not for Eleanor, for Courtney, because this wasn't about what had already happened. It was about who she would choose to become after. Do you believe people like Courtney deserve a second chance? Or should some mistakes be unforgivable? What Courtney doesn't know yet is that her greatest challenge won't come from the training ahead, but from confronting the person she's spent her life pretending not to be. And Eleanor Grant isn't finished testing her. Courtney Blake arrived at the headquarters community wing 30 minutes early every day. No uniform, no lipstick, no polished heels tapping power across terminal floors. Just sneakers, plain jeans, and the haunting echo of a mistake she couldn't erase. The lobby receptionist stopped offering polite smiles after the first week. Now, Courtney's face was just part of the furniture. 6 months in, she knew every hallway, every nameplate on every door, every curve of every chair in the diversity and equity training room. But what she couldn't memorize, what she still couldn't control, was how the stories made her feel. Each session was a mirror she couldn't look away from. A biracial teenager denied an internship because her name didn't sound professional. A military veteran turned away at a first-class counter because he wore a hoodie. A single black mother asked, on 3 separate occasions, to show her boarding pass in the business lounge, while her white colleagues walked past unchecked. The stories weren't told in anger. That made them worse. They were shared in exhaustion, in resignation, in the soft tremble of people too tired to keep proving their humanity. Courtney sat through it all, notebook open, eyes red. She asked no questions. She answered when called. She took the late shifts at the shelter outreach flights, cleaned the supply carts no one else wanted, served coffee at 4 a.m., community meetings where no one knew her name or cared. For the first time in her life, no one looked up to her. And strangely, that's when she started looking up to others. One evening, after a particularly brutal training day, she stood outside the building beneath a sky blurred with orange and ash blue. The city stretched before her, too vast, too unaware of what she'd lost, or what she was slowly building. She pulled her coat tighter, about to walk away, when she heard the voice behind her. "I've been watching." Eleanor Grant. She didn't walk with her cane anymore. She didn't need it. That night, she stood taller than ever, dressed in quiet charcoal elegance, her hair silver like a storm preparing to speak. Courtney turned around slowly. Her chest tightened. "I wasn't expecting." Eleanor raised a hand gently. "I didn't come to audit your work. I came to see your face." Courtney didn't know what that meant, but she felt her throat tighten just the same. Eleanor studied her for a long moment. "You've learned how to serve. That's good. But have you learned how to listen?" Courtney hesitated. "I'm trying." "No," Eleanor said, her voice almost kind. "Trying is passive. You either listen with your whole self or you don't." She stepped closer. "The day you tore my ticket, you weren't just attacking my dignity. You were reenacting something much older. Something this country never truly finished burying." "I know," Courtney whispered. "Do you?" Eleanor's gaze didn't soften. "Or do you only know because I had power? Would you have apologized if I'd been someone else? Someone invisible to your world?" Courtney didn't answer. Eleanor looked up at the stars breaking through the dusk. "The first time I sat in a boardroom, no one spoke to me for the entire meeting. I was the CEO, but they assumed I was the assistant." She laughed, not bitterly, almost with wonder. "I've built a fleet, a legacy, but it takes just one look from someone like you to remind me how easily it can be erased." Courtney's voice cracked. "I want to make it right." "You can't," Eleanor said flatly. "Some things you don't fix. You carry them. You learn how not to drop them again." Courtney nodded slowly, her eyes wet. Eleanor studied her one last time. "Tomorrow morning," she said quietly, "a decision will be made about your future. You won't be there for it, but I will." Then she turned, walked away without another word, leaving Courtney standing in the cold, wondering if grace was the kind of thing you could deserve, or only be given once, with no second offer. The next morning, a white envelope sat on Courtney's desk in the community wing, her name typed clean across the front. She stared at it for several minutes before opening it. Inside, a single sheet. No welcome. No apology. Just one sentence. You've been reinstated, but not to where you were. Your new title, Community Outreach Flight Instructor. Report Monday. Courtney sat back in her chair. For a moment, she felt nothing. Then everything. It wasn't a reward. It wasn't a punishment. It was a responsibility. And somewhere deep inside her chest, in a place she didn't know how to name, something fragile began to heal. Months passed. Courtney stood in front of a group of fresh recruits, mostly young, mostly eager, some too confident for their own good. She held a clicker in one hand, her blazer crisp, her voice steady. But when she spoke, it wasn't about safety procedures or beverage carts. It was about what people carry that you can't see. The invisible luggage of fear, history, pride, and pain. And how sometimes the worst thing you can do is look at someone and see nothing. At the end of her session, a trainee raised her hand. "Miss Blake," she asked, "how did you end up teaching this course?" Courtney paused, then smiled, not proudly, but honestly. "Because I once failed it." Outside the training room, a figure watched through the glass. Silver hair pulled back, arms folded, not out of scrutiny, but quiet observation. Eleanor Grant stood there, unmoving. Then, slowly, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the corridor. Not because she no longer cared, but because she finally did. What part of this story moved you the most? And what would you have done if you were in Eleanor's shoes? If you felt this story deeply, comment 100 below. Tell us what country you're watching from, and share it with someone who needs this message today. Thank you for watching Life Stories.